The world knew General Marcus Thorne as a monument of cold authority, a man whose strategic genius was forged in the unfeeling fires of war. His own soldiers spoke of him in whispers, calling him the Granite General, for he seemed carved from stone, unmoved by fear or pity. So when a catastrophic training accident left a young, groundbreaking female officer, Captain Alara Vance, broken and barely alive, the entire military base braced for his response. They expected a swift clinical inquiry, a reassignment of personnel, a stoic nod to duty. What they did not expect was for the general to slam his fist through a reinforced glass panel, for his voice to crack over the hospital comms demanding a medevac now, or for him to stand vigil outside the surgical theater, his uniform stained with the blood of a soldier who was not supposed to matter so much. This is not just a story of an accident. It is the story of the crack in the granite and the shocking, hidden truth that bled out from it. The desert training ground, known to the troops as the Crucible, shimmered under a relentless midday sun. The air buzzed with the tension of a live-fire exercise, a complex drill testing a new integrated combat system. At the heart of it was Captain Alara Vance, a woman whose rise through the ranks had been both celebrated and silently resented. She wasn't just a soldier. She was the architect of the Aegis Protocol, a tactical software that synchronized drone support with ground troop movements in real time. To traditionalists, it was a video game. To General Thorne, it was the future, and Vance was its most vital pilot. Thorne observed from the command bunker, a half-buried concrete fortress overlooking the valley. His face, all sharp angles and stern lines, was impassive on the large monitor feeds. He watched Vance's unit, a mix of seasoned veterans and tech specialists, advance through a simulated village. Her voice over the comms was calm, precise, directing overhead drones with an almost casual efficiency. Reaper 2, hover Sector Bravo 7. Fox Team, hold at the West Culvert. Marking hostiles. To Thorne, her mind was a rare instrument, a balance of instinct and intellect he hadn't seen in decades. He had handpicked her for this, shielding her project from bureaucratic knives, his interests strictly professional, or so he told himself. The accident was a chain reaction of small, brutal failures. A legacy mortar unit, operated by a nervous crew from a traditional artillery battalion, misfired. A single round, a live one mistakenly loaded amidst the blanks, arced wildly off its programmed trajectory. The command bunker's alarm screamed a millisecond before the shell struck, not the village, but the main relay transmitter on the ridge above Vance's position. The explosion was a deafening crump of earth and metal. On Thorne screens, the drone feeds dissolved into static snow. The ground team's vital signs, usually a steady stream of green data, flickered and sparked with red emergency warnings. Report. Thorne's voice was a whip crack in the suddenly silent bunker. Chaos erupted as technicians scrambled. The initial reports were confused. Explosion at Relay Alpha. We've lost all telemetry. Fox Team is non-responsive. Then, a broken transmission from the field medic, voice young and shaking. We have a catastrophic casualty. It's Captain Vance. Shrapnel penetration, thoracic, and abdominal. She's losing air fast. We need an avian now. For a moment, General Marcus Thorne did not move. To everyone watching, he was the Granite General processing data, but inside a fault line sheared open. The clinical words catastrophic casualty attached to the name Vance did not compute. He saw the ghost of a young woman with a fierce smile accepting her commission, the determined set of her jaw in a strategy meeting, the brilliant code on a screen that was an extension of her mind. A mind now being extinguished in the dust. His reaction was not calculated. It was visceral. He turned from the main screen, his movement too controlled, too quiet. His fist, driven by a force that seemed to come from the earth itself, shot out and connected with a reinforced glass panel separating the command station from the comms desk. The safety glass webbed into 1,000 fractures, a shockwave of sound that silenced the room. Blood dripped from his knuckles. mingling with the glittering dust. He did not flinch. Leaning into the comms officer's microphone, his voice was low, but it vibrated with a terrifying, raw intensity that no one had ever heard. "This is Thorn. Scramble Mercy 1. I don't care if you have to clear the sky with a missile. You get that helicopter to her coordinates in 5 minutes, or the next thing I scramble will be your careers into a penal battalion. Do you understand?" The order was illegal, overriding all procedure. The bunker staff froze, staring at the blood on the glass, at the madness in the general's eyes. Without another word, he strode out, commandeering a jeep. He arrived at the medevac landing zone as the Black Hawk helicopter was settling, its downdraft whipping sand into a stinging frenzy. The medics were loading a stretcher. He saw only a flash of her. The pale face, the oxygen mask already fogged with blood, the ruin of her tactical vest cut away to reveal bandages rapidly darkening. Her eyes were closed. For a heartbeat, he was not a general. He was a man staring into an abyss that had just opened at his feet. He climbed into the medevac without permission. As the helicopter lurched skyward, he found himself holding not her hand, but a crumpled piece of her uniform they had cut away, his bloodied fist closing around the fabric as if it were a lifeline. The medics worked frantically, calling out numbers that sounded like a death sentence. Thorn just stared at her face, the granite general shattered, replaced by a dread so profound it was a physical weight. The helicopter raced towards the Central Military Hospital, carrying a dying officer and a secret that Thorn had buried for 25 years, a secret that was now screaming to the surface with every shallow breath she took. The sterile, green-tiled chaos of the military hospital's level. One trauma center absorbed Captain Hilaire Vance. General Thorn was a force of nature shoved to the margins. He was physically barred from the surgical theater, a pair of steadfast orderlies becoming an immovable wall. "Sir, you cannot go in there. You are compromising the sterile field." The words were distant buzz. He stood, a statue of tension and gore in the glaring hallway, his uniform jacket smeared with her dried blood and the dust of the crucible. The fabric he clutched had her name taped. Vance. Time distorted. Minutes felt like hours. The base commander, Major General Price, arrived, his face a mask of concern underlain with sharp scrutiny. "Marcus," Price said, approaching carefully as one with a loaded weapon. "We need a debrief. The inquiry board is being assembled. This is a Tier 1 incident." Thorn's gaze didn't leave the double doors. "The inquiry can wait." "It cannot. A live round was fired. A project worth billions is in jeopardy. Your captain is in the best hands." Price paused, studying Thorn's bloody knuckles, his uncharacteristic disarray. "Your reaction at the bunker is already causing talk, Marcus. Punching through safety glass? Threatening air traffic control? People are asking why the unprecedented personal investment." That question, the one Thorn had dodged for a quarter century, hung in the antiseptic air. He finally turned to Price, and the look in his eyes was not that of a superior officer, but of a man cornered. "Because she is not just my captain," he said, the words dragged from a deep, hidden vault. "She is my daughter." The quiet confession hit Price like a concussive blast. He stepped back, his official demeanor crumbling into stunned disbelief. The story, in terse, painful fragments, tumbled out in the harsh fluorescent light. A young Lieutenant Thorn, deployed overseas. A brief, profound, and impossible love affair with a brilliant local interpreter named Layla. A pregnancy revealed just as his unit was abruptly rotated home, communication severed by war and bureaucracy. He had searched, using every resource for years. He'd found nothing but dead ends and silence, presumed them lost. He had built his fortress of a life around that loss. Then, 5 years ago, a file landed on his desk, a candidate for an experimental officer program. Hilaire Vance. The photograph, her eyes, Layla's eyes, staring back at him with his own determined jawline. A background check on her mother. Deceased, a refugee scholar. The dates aligned. The truth was undeniable. He had pulled every string, not to give her favor, but to be near her, to observe the living proof of his history. He had guided her career from a shadow's distance, a silent guardian. He had watched her inherit his strategic mind and her mother's fierce compassion, a combination that made her extraordinary. And he had never said a word, bound by protocol, by fear of the scandal, by the crushing guilt of his absence, and by the desperate hope that she might earn her way to him, that he could one day find the courage to speak. Price was silent for a long minute, the weight of the secret settling between them. "My God, Marcus! Does she know?" Thorne shook his head, a barely perceptible movement of agony. "I was waiting for the right moment, a moment that may never come now." Just then, a surgeon in blood-spattered scrubs pushed through the doors. Thorne was on him in 2 strides. The surgeon's face was etched with fatigue. "The injuries are as severe as reported," he began, his voice flat with professional detachment. "We've removed shrapnel from her lung and liver. There's significant spinal trauma at the T12 vertebra. We've stabilized her, but she's in a medically induced coma. The next 72 hours are critical. Even if she survives," he hesitated, meeting Thorne's desperate gaze. "General, there is a high probability of permanent paralysis from the waist down. Her military career is over." The words paralysis and over echoed in the hollow space Thorne's hope had occupied. The daughter who commanded drones and led men, whose life was kinetic energy and purpose, might never walk again. The guilt was a tectonic shift, collapsing his internal landscape. This was his fault. His world, his machinery of war, had broken her. He had failed Layla, and now he had failed Alara. He was given a moment, suited in a sterile gown, to see her. The vibrant officer was gone, replaced by a pale effigy in a tangle of wires and tubes. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sign of life. He stood by the bed, his hand hovering over her limp one, afraid to touch. The granite general was gone, washed away in a flood of regret. He made a silent vow, not as her commander, but as her father. He would tear the world apart to give her a future. He would burn his career, his reputation, everything. He didn't know how, but the mission was now singular. Save Alara Vance, not from death, but from a life she would perceive as a prison. The war outside no longer mattered. The only battle that remained was in this room. A cold, procedural tempest engulfed the base. The official inquiry board convened, a panel of stern-faced officers for whom Captain Vance was a case file, a costly asset compromised. General Thorne, forced to compartmentalize his personal hell, sat before them in a freshly pressed uniform, his injured hand bandaged, a visible testament to his loss of composure. He defended the Aegis Protocol, defended the training exercise, but took full responsibility for the systemic failure that led to the live-round misfire. His testimonies were masterclasses in controlled deflection, drawing fire onto his own command to shield the junior artillery crew from crucifixion. The board was suspicious of his extreme ownership, but could not pierce his armor of facts. Meanwhile, in the silent world of the hospital room, Alara began the agonizing crawl back. The medical coma was lifted. Her first conscious sensation was not pain, but a terrifying absence, a void where her legs should be. Panic, sharp and animalistic, was her first true emotion. A nurse calmed her, explained the spinal shock, the swelling, the uncertainty. The word paralysis was used gently, but it landed like a bomb. Thorne visited daily. Their interactions were a fragile, stilted dance. She was confused by his presence. The granite general at her bedside was a paradox she was too weak to solve. "Sir, you don't have to," she would rasp, her voice frail. "It is my duty, Captain," he would reply, the title feeling like a lie on his tongue. He didn't speak as a general. He read her status reports from her team, discussed the geopolitical updates she was missing, treating her mind as the active instrument it still was. He brought a data tablet, allowing her to see, though not interact with, the Aegis system. It was a lifeline to her identity. The turning point came a week in. Pain had become her constant companion, a deep, agonizing throb in her back. During a brutal physiotherapy session where therapists tried to move unresponsive limbs, a sob of sheer frustration and despair escaped her. Thorne, who had been standing rigidly by the window, turned. He saw not a soldier, but his daughter in unbearable pain. Protocol evaporated. He crossed the room, dismissed the therapist with a look, and did something no one had done since the accident. He sat on the edge of her bed. His voice, when he spoke, was stripped bare of all authority. "Alara," he said, using her first name for the first time, "listen to me. This pain, this emptiness you feel, is not the end of your mission. It is a change in terrain. Your mother," he hesitated, the name foreign and precious, Layla, she used to say that the deepest valleys grow the tallest trees. "You are in the valley now. The climb will be the hardest thing you will ever do. But you will not climb it alone." He reached out, his large, scarred hand covering her small, clenched fist. It was a gesture of pure, paternal solidarity. Alara stared at him, her eyes wide with pain and shock. The mention of her mother's name, the intimate knowledge, the raw tenderness in his eyes. It pieced together a puzzle she never knew she was holding. The extra interest in her career, the protective instincts, the haunted look he'd sometimes get. "You knew her?" she whispered. Thorne's jaw tightened. He had not planned for this moment. Not here, not now. But the truth, having begun to leak, could not be contained. "I did," he said, his voice thick. "And I've spent every day since you came under my command fighting the urge to tell you that your relentless courage, your brilliant mind, it feels like a second chance I don't deserve." He did not say the word father. He didn't need to. The truth hung in the space between them, vast and terrifying and suddenly, profoundly clarifying. Alara turned her head away, looking at the ceiling, tears tracing lines down her temples into her hair. The revelation was too colossal to process amidst the physical agony. She didn't reject him. She didn't accept him. She simply held his hand, the connection a tangible anchor in the storm of her shattered body and upturned life. The fortress walls had fallen. The real war for her future, and for their fragile, newfound connection, was just beginning. The revelation was a seismic event that changed the atmosphere in the hospital room. Alara retreated into a shell of silent processing. She didn't speak of Thorne's confession, and he, terrified of pushing her over an emotional ledge, didn't elaborate. Their interactions became a series of quiet, practical steps. He became her fiercest advocate, battling hospital administrators to bring in a specialist in spinal trauma from a civilian research hospital, a doctor known for aggressive, cutting-edge rehabilitation. This doctor, a woman named Eris, was blunt. The cord was bruised, not severed. "There's a window. Nerves can reawaken, but it will require work that will make your worst day in the crucible feel like a vacation. It will be painful, humiliating, and there are no guarantees." Alara, her eyes burning with a new kind of fire, a fusion of military grit and a personal, desperate need to know who she now was, simply nodded. "Tell me what to do." Thorne shifted his entire life. Command duties were handled remotely from a laptop in the hospital's family lounge. He was present for every session. When Eris's team had Alara suspended in a harness over a treadmill, her dead legs forced into a walking motion, he was there, not speaking, just being a steady presence. When she collapsed into his arms after, weeping with frustration and exhaustion, he held her, solid as a rock. He learned to assist with exercises, to massage her numb limbs to stimulate circulation, his soldiers' hands performing tasks of delicate care. Outside, the inquiry concluded. Thorne received a formal reprimand for his actions, a black mark on a flawless record. He accepted it without appeal. The artillery crew was reassigned. The Aegis protocol was put on hold, its fate tied to its creator's recovery. The base buzzed with the confirmed gossip. The general's attachment was unquestionably personal. The truth of their relationship remained a closely held secret between Thorne, Price, and Alara. But the speculation was enough. One afternoon, during a rare moment of quiet, Alara spoke, her eyes fixed on the skeletal framework of her wheelchair. "Tell me about her. About Layla." It was the first time she had initiated a conversation about the past. Thorn, sitting in the visitor's chair, took a slow breath. He spoke of a young woman with a laugh that could disarm tension, a linguist who understood the soul of a language, not just its words. He told stories he had locked away, sharing tea in a dusty outpost as she explained a local proverb, her courage in navigating dangerous villages to gather intelligence, the stolen moments that felt like a separate, brighter world. He did not romanticize the war, but he honored the love. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," he said, his voice rough. "Until you." Alara listened, building a ghost of a mother she only knew from faded photographs and stories from other refugees. She saw herself in the descriptions, the tenacity, the analytical mind. She also saw the source of her own loneliness, a hole that had always been there. "Why didn't you find us?" The question wasn't an accusation, but a plea for understanding. Thor didn't offer excuses. He detailed the brutal aftermath of his withdrawal, the fog of war, the destroyed records, the dead ends. "I searched until I was told to stop, until it was deemed a security risk and an obsession. I believed you were both lost. Building a life after that, it was just building walls." He looked at her, his gaze open, showing her the man behind the granite. "Finding you was a miracle. Losing you now, it was not an option. It was the honesty that bridged the gap." Alara didn't say father. But later that day, as he adjusted her pillows, she said quietly, "Thank you, Marcus." It was a seismic shift, away from Sir, toward his name, toward the man, not the myth. The physical progress was infinitesimal, but monumental. A day came when Eris, during a nerve stimulation test, said, "I saw a twitch in your big toe," a voluntary signal. It was the faintest flicker, invisible to the naked eye, but on the EMG readout, it was a supernova. Alara cried again, but this time they were tears of a furious, hopeful joy. Thorn's smile was a rare, breathtaking sight, crinkling the corners of his eyes. The valley was still deep, but the first green shoot of a tree had broken ground. The fight shifted from survival to a new reality. Alara was discharged, not to barracks, but to a ground-level apartment Thorn had secured and retrofitted with ramps and handrails. Their dynamic was a strange, evolving tapestry, part commander-subordinate, part father-daughter, part patient and caregiver, part two soldiers rebuilding a life behind enemy lines. Alara's world was now defined by wheels, but her mind refused to be confined. From her home workstation, she hacked back into the Aegis protocol, with official clearance now, thanks to Thorn. She began redesigning it. Her first-hand experience of vulnerability on the battlefield, coupled with her new physical perspective, sparked innovation. She developed protocols for drone-mediated medical evacuation and terrain analysis for mobility-impaired personnel. She wasn't just fixing the system. She was evolving it with the empathy it previously lacked. Thorn watched her reclaim her purpose, pride swelling in his chest. He began the process of retiring from active command. The army was his life, but Alara was his legacy. He set up a private foundation, funneling his savings and calling in favors from defense contractors to fund advanced cybernetic research and spinal nerve regeneration. The scandal of his intense focus on a single wounded officer had morphed, in the eyes of many, into a story of fierce loyalty. The truth of their blood relation remained their secret, a private bedrock. A year after the accident, the Foundation hosted a gala. Alara, in a sleek dress, her wheelchair a testament not to defeat but to command, presented her redesigned Aegis 2.0 system to a room of generals, politicians, and scientists. Her presentation was crisp, brilliant, and uncompromising. The applause was thunderous. From the back of the room, Thorn stood, not in uniform, but in a simple suit. He did not clap. He simply watched, his eyes shining. the ghost of Layla smiling through their daughter's triumph. Afterward, on the balcony under a blanket of stars, they had a moment alone. The sounds of the gala were a distant murmur. Alara looked up at him, the man who had shattered glass and protocols for her, who had held her through pain and shown her her own mother's face. "General," she began, the old title of formality now filled with new meaning. He smiled gently. "I think we're past that, Alara." She nodded. "Marcus, Dad." The word, tentative and powerful, hung in the night air. "I don't know if I'll ever walk on a parade ground again. But because of you, I'm still marching." Thorn knelt beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level, a gesture of equality, of surrender, of love. He took her hand. "You have marched further in this past year than most soldiers do in a lifetime. And you have led me home." He placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, a benediction and a promise. The granite general was gone. In his place was Marcus Thorn, a father. The officer who was supposed to be broken was now one of the most influential minds in modern defense, her perspective forged in fire and steel. The injuries had been severe, but the reaction, a journey from clandestine guilt to open devotion, from shattered bodies to rebuilt souls, had forged something unbreakable. Their story was no longer about a shocking reaction, but about a slow, miraculous becoming. The war was over. A life, rich and unexpected, had just begun. This response is AI-generated and, for reference purposes only,